This story will make you question everything you thought you knew about the roads you drive on. It comes from veteran truck driver Pierre Dubois, a man who has been driving cross-country for over 20 years without a single major incident. Pierre is known among his fellow drivers as someone who is unfazed, someone who has seen it all and handles whatever happens on the road with calm professionalism. That reputation will be tested one cold February night in 2023 on Trans-Canada Highway 1, which runs through British Columbia. Pierre is transporting high-value pharmaceuticals from Vancouver to Calgary, about 2 hours behind schedule due to weather delays. It was just past midnight when he reached a particularly desolate stretch of road between Kamloops and Revelstoke. You know the stretch if you've ever driven it, where the wind howls across empty plains and your headlights seem to be swallowed by the darkness. The temperature had dropped to minus 10 degrees Celsius and a light snow was making the road hazardous enough that Pierre had to keep his speed around 80 kilometers per hour. That's when he first noticed the convoy behind him, 3 trucks, all moving in perfect formation about 400 meters back. At first, Pierre didn't think much of it. Truckers often travel together for safety, especially in bad weather. However, as the kilometers ticked by, something began to feel off. The trucks maintained the exact same distance, no matter how Pierre adjusted his speed. When he slowed for a steep incline, they slowed. When he sped up on a straightaway, they matched his speed perfectly. It felt as if they were tethered to him by an invisible rope. Pierre tried to hail them on his CB radio, switching through standard channels. "Hello, convoy behind me. You guys copy?" Nothing but static. He tried again on channel 19, the unofficial trucker's frequency. "This is an eastbound driver at kilometer 380, looking to speak to the 3 trucks running behind me." Still nothing, not even the usual chatter you'd expect to hear from other drivers in the area. The radio was completely silent except for the occasional burst of static that almost sounded like whispering if you listened too closely. As Pierre crested a hill near the 390-kilometer marker, he got his first clear look at the trucks in his rearview mirror. All 3 were older models. He could tell by their headlight configurations and the shape of their cabs. They looked like trucks from the 90s or early 2000s, the kind you don't see much on the road anymore. What struck him was that despite the freezing weather and blowing snow, not one of them had their running lights on, only their headlights piercing the gloom like 6 glowing eyes. The feeling of unease intensified when Pierre realized he hadn't seen any other traffic for over an hour. On a major highway like Trans-Canada 1, even in the middle of the night, you'd expect to see at least a few other cars or trucks. But the highway was completely deserted save for Pierre and his mysterious escort. It was as if they were driving through a world where everyone else had simply vanished. Pierre decided to test his followers. He pulled into a rest area at kilometer 400, thinking the trucks would either stop as well or continue past him. Instead, they slowed and parked in a line at the far end of the rest area, engines running, headlights still on. Pierre could make out the silhouettes of drivers in each cab, but they weren't moving. They just sat there watching him. The rest area itself felt wrong. Despite being a primary stop on a busy highway, it was completely deserted. The parking lot lights were functional, but they cast strange shadows that seemed to move even when nothing was causing them. The building housing the restrooms and vending machines was dark, and when Pierre approached it, he found a handwritten sign taped to the door that simply read, "Closed until further notice," in shaky handwriting. Pierre decided he didn't want to find out what his followers wanted. He climbed back into his cab and pulled out of the rest area, glancing in his rearview mirror as he merged back onto the highway. The 3 trucks immediately followed, settling back into their perfect formation exactly 400 meters behind him. This continued for another 80 kilometers through small towns that should have shown signs of life, but appeared completely abandoned. It was around 3 a.m. when something happened that still gives Pierre nightmares. He was approaching a long incline when his engine began to sputter. The temperature gauge started climbing into the red, and he could smell burning coolant. Any truck driver will tell you that losing an engine in the middle of nowhere in sub-zero weather isn't just an inconvenience. It can be a death sentence. Pierre managed to coast his truck to the top of the incline before it died completely. He pulled onto the shoulder with his hazard lights flashing. The 3 trucks that had been following him didn't stop. They didn't even slow down. They passed him at normal highway speed, and as each one passed, Pierre got his first clear look at the drivers. What he saw defied explanation. Each cab appeared empty. There were no drivers visible behind the wheel, no movement within. The trucks were either driving themselves or being driven by something Pierre couldn't see. As the third truck passed, Pierre saw something that chilled him to the bone. Painted on the back of the trailer in faded letters was the name of a company he recognized, Pacific Haulers Incorporated. Pierre knew the name because he had read about it in a Canadian trucking journal. Pacific Haulers was a small trucking company that operated in British Columbia in the 1990s. The company folded after 3 of their drivers disappeared during a blizzard in 1990. Their trucks were found abandoned on Trans-Canada Highway 1 with no trace of what happened to the men. Pierre sat in his dead truck, watching the taillights of the 3 Pacific Haulers Cheries trucks disappear into the darkness ahead. The temperature inside his cab was already dropping, and he knew he probably had an hour before hypothermia became a real problem. He tried his cell phone, but there was no signal. He tried his CB radio again, and this time he heard something that sent shivers down his spine. Faintly through the static, he could hear voices conversing. 3 men were discussing the weather, road conditions, and their delivery schedules. The conversation sounded normal, even mundane, except for one thing. The voices were talking about road conditions and truck stops that had changed decades ago. They mentioned a truck stop in Revelstoke that had been demolished in the early 2000s, as if it were still open. They discussed avoiding a construction zone that Pierre knew had been completed 18 years prior. Then one of the voices said something that made Pierre's heart stop. "We've got a broken down driver at kilometer 450. Should we go back and help him?" Another voice replied, "No, let him freeze. We've got a schedule to keep." A third voice chuckled, a sound like wind howling through a graveyard, and said, "He'll be joining us soon enough." Pierre realized with growing horror that they were talking about him. Somehow, these phantom drivers knew exactly where he was and what his situation was. As if in response to his thoughts, the radio crackled again, and one of the voices spoke directly to him. "Don't worry, Pierre. The cold isn't so bad once you get used to it. We've been driving these roads for 33 years now, and winter nights don't bother us anymore." At that moment, Pierre saw headlights approaching from behind. Not the steady beam of normal headlights, but flickering, wavering lights that seemed to dance in the darkness. The 3 trucks were coming back for him, driving in reverse down the highway at highway speed. As they drew closer, Pierre could see that the trucks themselves looked wrong. Their paint was faded and rusted, their chrome was dull, and ice crystals covered their windshields even though their engines were running. The lead truck stopped directly behind Pierre's trailer, and he heard the sound of a door slamming. Footsteps crunched through the snow towards his cab. But when Pierre looked in his rearview mirror, he couldn't see anyone walking. The footsteps stopped at his driver's side door, and someone knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echoed in the cold air. A voice called out, muffled by the wind but clearly audible. "Engine trouble, friend. We could give you a ride." The voice sounded friendly enough, but there was something off about it, something that reminded Pierre of frozen vocal cords and blue lips from frostbite. "We know these roads very well, been driving them longer than most living folk." Pierre didn't answer. Every instinct he'd developed in 20 years of trucking screamed at him not to open that door. He sat perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping whoever or whatever was outside would give up and leave. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and the voice called out again, "Come on, Pierre. Don't be rude. We know you're in there, and we know you're getting cold. Open up and we'll warm you up real good." The temperature in Pierre's cab continued to drop, and his breath plumed visibly. He began to shiver uncontrollably, and he knew that accepting the help of his mysterious visitors would be far worse than freezing to death. It was then that Pierre heard the sound of another engine approaching from the east. Real headlights, steady, warm, and normal, cut through the darkness as a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, officer pulled up behind the phantom convoy. Pierre watched in his rearview mirror as the patrol car's emergency lights began to flash, illuminating the 3 trucks that had been following him. But in the strobing red and blue light, Pierre could see that the trucks were now different. They were still the same old models, but now they looked like they truly belonged in a museum. Their paint was completely faded. Their tires were flat and cracked, and frost covered every surface. Most disturbingly, he could see through the cab windows to the seats behind. The trucks were completely empty. The officer's PA system crackled to life. "Driver of the broken-down vehicle, this is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Are you all right in there?" Pierre had never been so happy to hear another human voice in his life. He grabbed his CB radio and replied, "I'm fine, officer." "Engine overheated, but there are 3 trucks here that..." Pierre looked in his rearview mirror again, but the trucks were gone. Vanished completely, as if they had never been there. The officer spent the next 2 hours helping Pierre get his truck running again. The simple repair involved a loose coolant hose that shouldn't have caused the total engine failure Pierre experienced. As they worked, Pierre recounted to the officer the story of the 3 trucks that had been following him. The officer listened without comment until Pierre finished his story. Then the officer said something that still haunts Pierre to this day. "You're not the first driver to report seeing the Pacific Haulers trucks on this stretch of highway. We get maybe 3 or 4 reports a year, always during winter blizzards, always involving a broken-down driver around kilometer 450. The strange thing is, we investigated the disappearance of the original Pacific Haulers drivers in 1990. Found their trucks right here in this spot with the engines running and the heaters on full. But the cabs were frozen solid inside like they'd been sitting empty in the cold for days." Pierre managed to get his truck running and completed his delivery to Calgary without further incident. But he never drove that stretch of Trans-Canada 1 through British Columbia again, especially in winter. He switched to a coastal route that added a day and a half to his cross-country trips. But as Pierre says, an extra day and a half of driving is a small price to pay to avoid spending an eternity in a convoy of dead truckers. The truly disturbing part of this story isn't just Pierre's experience. It's the fact that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, confirmed they have files on 17 similar encounters over the past 30 years. 17 drivers who broke down at kilometer 450 and reported being approached by the Phantom Pacific Haulers convoy. Of those 17 drivers, 3 were never seen again. Their trucks were found in the same condition as the original Pacific Haulers vehicles. Engines running, heaters on, cabs frozen, and no trace of the drivers. The police wouldn't comment officially on the disappearances, but Officer Thompson, who helped Pierre that night, retired from the force 6 months later. In his retirement interview with a local newspaper, he said something that adds a final horror to this tale. "Some roads retain their ghosts, and some ghosts aren't content to merely haunt. They're still trying to complete their routes, and they're always looking for drivers to join their convoy." This story proves that sometimes the most terrifying experiences start with the smallest mistakes. It comes from Anya Petrova, a long-haul truck driver who has been driving for 12 years and prides herself on knowing every major road in Europe like the back of her hand. Anya is the type of driver who can navigate from Warsaw to Berlin without looking at her GPS, relying solely on her encyclopedic knowledge of highways, truck stops, and shortcuts rarely encountered by other drivers. It was a cold autumn night in October 2023. Anya, 35 years old, was transporting engine parts from Poland to Germany, taking her usual route along the E40 motorway. She was ahead of schedule and feeling pleased about an early arrival when she encountered unexpected construction near the Ukrainian and Belarusian border. The motorway was completely closed due to a chemical spill from an overturned tanker truck, and diversion signs directed traffic onto a series of rural roads that would eventually connect to Regional Road P01. Anya had taken this detour once before, perhaps about 4 years ago, so she wasn't overly concerned. The route added about 60 kilometers to her journey, but it would get her around the construction and back on track. What she didn't realize was that road construction and rural development had significantly altered the area since her last visit. New roads had been built, old ones had been abandoned, and the diversion signs she was following were actually remnants of a previous construction project that should have been removed months ago. By the time Anya realized she was lost, she had been driving on increasingly narrow rural roads for over an hour. Her GPS had lost signal about 25 minutes prior, and her CB radio was picking up nothing but static. The roads she was on weren't even marked on her truck map, and every turn seemed to lead to another unmarked intersection. with no signs indicating a way back to civilization. The surrounding scenery was disturbing in a way Anya couldn't explain. The trees on both sides of the road were dense and overgrown, creating a tunnel effect that blocked out most of the moonlight. What little she could see in her headlights seemed wrong. Farmhouses appeared abandoned with broken windows and overgrown yards, yet with fresh tire tracks in their driveways. Fields that should have been full of crops in late autumn were instead covered in dead vegetation that looked as if it had been burned or poisoned. Anya's first instinct was to turn around and head back to the motorway, but the roads she was on were too narrow for a truck and trailer to make a U-turn. She needed to find a spot wide enough or an intersection large enough to maneuver her rig. As she continued forward, searching for a place to turn around, she began to notice she was passing the same markers repeatedly. A rusted mailbox shaped like an owl, a dead tree with distinctive branches, a red barn with half its roof missing. At first, Anya thought she was just disoriented and that the rural scenery made similar features appear identical. But when she passed the owl-shaped mailbox for the fourth time, she knew something was profoundly wrong. According to her odometer, she had been driving for 2.5 hours since leaving the motorway, yet somehow she was circling on roads that should have been taking her in a straight line. Anya decided to stop at the next house that showed signs of life and ask for directions. She had always been independent and proud of never needing help on the road, but getting home safely was more important than her ego. The first house she encountered was a small white farmhouse with a porch light on and what appeared to be a flickering television through the front window. Anya parked her truck in the gravel driveway and walked to the front door. When she knocked, the sound of the television instantly stopped, but no one came to the door. Anya could see that the lights inside were on, and she was sure she had seen movement through the window. As she got closer, she knocked again, harder this time, and called out, "Excuse me, I'm a truck driver and I'm lost. Can you help me with directions?" Still no response, but Anya could hear a whispering sound coming from inside the house. As Anya turned to leave, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There were children's toys scattered across the front yard, a worn-out tricycle, several rag dolls, a sandbox filled with sand. But the toys were covered in a thick layer of dust and grime, as if they had been sitting outside for years. The sandbox contained not just sand, but also dead insects and what looked like small animal bones. Anya hurried back to her truck and drove on, but every house she passed showed the same pattern. Lights on, signs of recent activity. Yet no one would answer the door when she knocked, and all of them had children's toys in their yards, toys that looked like they had been abandoned for years, but arranged as if children had just finished playing with them. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every kilometer. Anya kept checking her mirrors, but there was never any traffic behind her. Yet she couldn't shake the sensation that she was being followed, that something was trailing her truck just beyond the reach of her headlights. Several times she thought she saw movement in the tree line, shapes that were too large to be animals, but moving in a way that didn't seem human. It was around 2:30 a.m. when Anya encountered the first person she had seen since leaving the motorway. A woman stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by Anya's truck headlights. She appeared middle-aged, wearing a white nightgown stained with what looked like mud or dried blood. The woman didn't move, didn't wave for help, didn't try to get out of the way. She just stood there staring directly at Anya's truck. Anya slowed down and stopped about 6 meters from the woman. She rolled down her window and called out, "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that Anya had spoken. She continued to stare at the truck with an expression Anya later described as hungry, as if she were looking at food instead of a person. After several minutes of trying to communicate with the woman, Anya decided to carefully drive around her. But as she began to move, the woman moved too, always positioning herself directly in front of the truck. It was clear she had no intention of letting Anya pass. The woman's movements were strange and unnatural. She would glide from one side of the road to the other without seeming to take steps, and her feet never quite touched the ground. Anya decided to back up and find another route. But as she put the truck in reverse and checked her mirrors, she discovered there were now more people standing behind her truck, at least 6 figures in similar stained nightgowns, all standing perfectly still, all staring at her truck with the same hungry expression. Anya was surrounded. It was then that Anya noticed her truck's engine was running erratically. The RPMs were fluctuating wildly, and she could smell something burning. Her temperature gauge was climbing into the red zone, and her oil pressure was dropping. It was as if the truck itself was affected by whatever was happening on these roads. Anya had meticulously cared for this truck for 5 years, and it had never given her the slightest trouble. The mechanical failure was too sudden and too severe to be a coincidence. The figures around her truck began to move closer, closing the circle. Anya could see their faces more clearly now in her headlights, and what she saw defied explanation. Their skin was pale and waxy, like melted and reformed candles. Their eyes were completely black with no visible pupils or irises. And when they opened their mouths, Anya could see that their teeth were sharp and pointed like a shark's, but set in human jaws. Anya made a desperate decision. She floored the accelerator and drove straight towards the woman in front of her truck, hoping to scare her into moving, or if necessary, to push through. But as the truck approached, the woman suddenly vanished, not moving aside, not jumping away, but simply disappearing like smoke. The other figures did the same, melting into the darkness as if they had never been there. Anya's truck suddenly roared back to life, all mechanical problems disappearing as quickly as they appeared. She slammed on the gas pedal and sped down the road, oblivious to narrow turns or steep hills, focused only on getting as far away as possible from those figures. Behind her, she could hear a sound like wailing, but it was coming from the trees on both sides of the road, following her as she drove. After 25 minutes of driving at dangerous speeds through winding roads, Anya saw something that almost brought her to tears of relief. A sign indicating she was approaching Regional Road P01. She followed the signs and found herself back on a main road with normal traffic and functioning streetlights. Her GPS immediately caught a signal again, and her CB radio crackled back to life with the familiar chatter of other truck drivers in the area. Anya pulled over at the first truck stop she found and called the Ukrainian National Police to report what she had experienced. The operator was polite but seemed unsurprised by her story. He took Anya's information and the estimated location where she got lost. Then he told her something that still gives her nightmares. "Ma'am, you are the 9th driver this year to report getting lost on those roads and encountering people in nightgowns. We've sent patrol cars to investigate, but we've never been able to find the roads the drivers describe. According to our maps and GPS systems, there's nothing in that area but dense forest." The operator went on to explain that the area Anya had driven through was the site of a former small rural community called Zoraya, which had been abandoned in the 1970s after a chemical plant pan explosion contaminated the groundwater. The entire town had been evacuated, and the government eventually razed all buildings and allowed the forest to reclaim the land. But truck drivers, hikers, and other travelers continued to report encounters with Zoraya's former residents, people who seemed unaware that their town no longer existed. Anya researched Zoraya's history when she got home and found that the chemical plant explosion occurred at night while most of the town's residents were asleep. Over 250 people died from chemical exposure. Most of them were found in their beds wearing nightgowns and pajamas. The contamination was so severe that the bodies could not be moved for weeks. And by the time cleanup crews arrived, many victims had been altered by the chemicals in a way that official reports only described as significant physical alterations to the deceased individuals. Anya never took that route through Ukraine again, even when construction delays would have made the detour worthwhile. She also noticed that other truck drivers who knew the area avoided discussing those rural roads, and when pressed for details, they quickly changed the subject. It was as if there was an unspoken understanding among drivers that some places are best left undiscovered, and some roads lead to destinations where living people should not go. The most disturbing part of Anya's story wasn't the encounter itself, but what happened afterward. 4 weeks later, Anya received a package at her home address, a package with no return address and a postmark from a post office that had been closed since 1979. Inside the package was a child's doll, identical to one of the toys she had seen in the yard of the first house where she stopped to ask for directions. The doll was wearing a miniature nightgown stained with the same dark substance she had seen on the figures in the road. Attached to the doll was a handwritten note in faded ink that simply read, "Thank you for visiting Zoraya. We hope you will return soon. We rarely get visitors these days, and we are always looking for new residents to join our community." The note was signed with dozens of names written in different handwritings, as if the entire town had contributed to the message. Anya immediately threw the doll away, but the next morning it was back on her doorstep. She burned it in her backyard, but within a week she received another package containing an identical doll with the same note. This has continued for over 2 years now, with Anya receiving a new doll every few weeks. She has moved twice since the initial incident, but somehow the packages always find her. Anya still drives long-haul routes across Europe, but she has installed multiple GPS units in her truck and carries detailed maps of every area she travels through. She has also joined online truck driver forums where drivers share information about roads to avoid. And she has found that her experience in Zoraya is not unique. There are dozens of similar communities in rural Europe, towns that were abandoned or destroyed but continue to exist in some form, inhabited by residents who refuse to accept that their time has passed. The final detail that makes Anya's story particularly horrifying is what she discovered when she researched postal records for the post office that supposedly sent her the dolls. According to official records, the Zoraya post office processed its last mail delivery the day before the chemical plant explosion in 1973. But postal workers at the regional facility reported that they still occasionally receive outgoing mail with a Zoraya postmark, always addressed to truck drivers who reported getting lost in that area. The Postal Service has no explanation for how these letters are generated or who creates them, but the letters continue to be delivered because they are technically valid addresses and the postage is correct, even though the stamps used were discontinued decades ago. This one involves something every truck driver relies heavily on, yet rarely questions: their communication radio. This story comes from veteran driver Jean-Luc Dubois, 48, who was transporting automotive parts from Paris to Berlin in June 2023. Jean-Luc had been using his trusty professional communication radio for over 15 years, a robust model that had never failed him and had been his steadfast companion on countless lonely nights on the road. Jean-Luc was driving along a particularly deserted stretch of the Autobahn 7 in central Germany around 3 a.m. when his radio suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that immediately caught his attention. A clear voice came through on Channel 19. "Eastbound driver in the white Scania, this is your shadow. There's an issue with your rear left trailer tire. Better pull over and check it before it blows." Jean-Luc looked in his rearview mirrors but couldn't see any truck behind him. The highway was completely empty in both directions, which was unusual for that area at such a late hour. He was driving a white Scania, so the description was accurate. However, Jean-Luc couldn't imagine how anyone could have seen his truck when there was no other traffic visible. Still, tire safety was not something any truck driver took lightly, so Jean-Luc decided to pull over at the nearest rest stop and do a quick check. As Jean-Luc walked around his trailer with a flashlight, he discovered that his rear left tire indeed showed a dangerous bulge on the sidewall, the kind of defect that could lead to a catastrophic tire blowout at high speeds. The tire needed immediate replacement. Jean-Luc was grateful for the warning, but he was also confused about who gave it and how they could have seen his truck so clearly when he couldn't see them. Jean-Luc pressed his radio button and transmitted, "Hey Shadow, this is the white Scania you warned about the tire. You were absolutely right. My tire has a sidewall issue. I want to thank you for the warning. Where are you operating from? I don't see any trucks in either direction." The response came immediately. "Don't worry about where I am, driver. Just focus on changing that tire safely. You've got about 40 minutes before that sidewall completely gives out." The precision of the warning was deeply unsettling. Jean-Luc had seen many tire failures in his career, and predicting when exactly a sidewall would fail was almost impossible, even for experienced mechanics. Yet, something about the voice on the radio conveyed absolute certainty, as if the speaker had somehow witnessed the tire's failure and was working backward from that knowledge. As Jean-Luc worked on changing the tire, the voice continued to provide comments and guidance. You need to double-check those lug nuts. The third one from the top is still loose. Jean-Luc checked, and sure enough, he had forgotten to properly tighten one of the nuts. There's a traffic police about 25 kilometers ahead using radar, so keep your speed below 110 kilometers per hour when you get back on the road. Every piece of information the voice provided turned out to be remarkably accurate. However, the most disturbing part was what the voice knew about Jean-Luc personally. During the hour it took to change the tire, the mysterious radio operator began sharing details about Jean-Luc's life that no stranger should have known. How's your daughter, Sophie, doing with her medical program? Must be tough for her being so far from home for university. Jean-Luc had never mentioned his daughter on the radio, and Sophie was indeed studying medicine at a university 1,300 kilometers from home. The voice continued, "That chest pain you've been having, you really should get that checked out by a doctor when you get home. It's not just heartburn like you keep telling yourself." Jean-Luc had been experiencing occasional chest discomfort for several weeks, but hadn't told anyone, not even his wife. He attributed it to stress and bad truck stop food, but the concern in the radio voice suggested something more serious. As Jean-Luc finished changing the tire and prepared to get back on the road, he tried once more to identify his helpful yet mysterious companion. "Shadow, I really appreciate all your help tonight. What's your handle? Maybe we can stay in touch." The response came after a long pause. "My handle used to be Knight Rider, but I don't use it anymore. Haven't used it since the accident." Jean-Luc asked what accident, but the voice seemed reluctant to explain. Finally, after several minutes of silence, the response came. "It happened right here, Jean-Luc. Same stretch of highway, same time of night. Tire blowout at kilometer 203. Lost control and went off the road. That was, let me see, about 6 years ago now. You'll see the cross marker when you pass kilometer 203. A white cross with some plastic flowers my wife put there." Jean-Luc felt a chill run down his spine. The voice claimed to be a deceased truck driver, someone who had died in the exact same kind of accident Jean-Luc had just avoided. He wanted to dismiss it as someone playing a cruel prank. But the level of detail about his personal life and the accuracy of all the warnings suggested something far more disturbing. As Jean-Luc drove past kilometer 203, his headlights illuminated a white wooden cross on the side of the highway, exactly where the voice said it would be. Weather-faded plastic flowers from years of exposure clung to the cross. Jean-Luc pulled over and walked to the marker where he found a small metal plaque with an inscription. "Thomas Knight Rider Schmidt, 1965 to 2017. Beloved husband and father, drive safe." Jean-Luc's hands trembled as he pressed his radio button one last time. "Knight Rider, are you still there?" The response came clearly, but with a sadness that seemed to echo across the desolate stretch. "I'm always here, Jean-Luc. This highway, it holds some of us. I couldn't help myself that night, but maybe I can help other drivers avoid the same fate. Take care of yourself and get your chest checked. Your daughter needs her father for a long time." The radio went silent after that, and Jean-Luc never heard from Knight Rider again. But when Jean-Luc returned home to Lyon 3 days later, he made an appointment with his doctor. Tests revealed a serious heart condition that required immediate surgery. According to his cardiologist, if Jean-Luc had continued to ignore his symptoms for even a few more weeks, he would most likely have suffered a severe heart attack while driving. Jean-Luc researched Thomas Schmidt and found that he was indeed a truck driver who died in a single vehicle accident at kilometer 203 in 2017. Schmidt had been driving for over 20 years and was known among other truck drivers for his willingness to help fellow drivers with mechanical issues and road advice. His wife confirmed that his handle was Knight Rider and that he was driving the Paris to Berlin route when the accident occurred. The most chilling detail Jean-Luc discovered was that Thomas Schmidt died exactly 6 years to the day before Jean-Luc's encounter with the voice on June 1st, Channel 19. Every year on the anniversary of his death, The German federal police receive reports from truck drivers claiming to have received warnings about road hazards from someone calling themselves Knight Rider at kilometer 203. The warnings are always accurate and have prevented dozens of accidents over the years. Jean-Luc still drives that route regularly, and he always listens carefully to his communication radio when passing kilometer 203. He has never heard from Knight Rider again, but other truck drivers have told him about receiving similar warnings in the same area. The truck driving community has begun to refer to that stretch of highway as Knight Rider's territory, and many drivers deliberately thank the guardian spirit who continues to watch over fellow truck drivers long after his own journey ended. This story takes us to a situation every truck driver has faced at some point: the decision to help or not to help a hitchhiker. The tale comes from Lena Petrova, a seasoned truck driver with 12 years of experience who maintains a strict personal policy of never picking up strangers. This policy has saved her life countless times. However, it was almost broken by what appeared to be an ordinary encounter on Norway's E6 highway in northern Norway near Tromsø during a brutal snowstorm in February 2024. The E6 is a major highway in Norway, known for its challenging winter conditions, especially in the north. Lena was driving south towards Narvik with a load of fishing equipment when the storm hit with ferocious intensity. Visibility dropped drastically to near zero, and the wind howled across the plains with such force that it pushed her 27,000-kilogram truck sideways on the highway. Lena had slowed down to about 45 kilometers per hour and was considering pulling over and waiting for the storm to subside when she spotted a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, dressed only in jeans and a thin jacket, completely inadequate for the sub-zero temperatures. She wasn't actively trying to flag down traffic, merely standing in the swirling snow about 3 meters from the highway. Such severe weather conditions, with heavy snowfall and strong winds, are common in Norway and Sweden during winter, often leading to motorists getting stuck and road closures. Lena's first instinct was to keep driving. Her company had a strict no hitchhiker policy, and she had never violated that rule. However, something about the sight of this girl standing in a deadly blizzard without proper clothing made Lena reconsider. Lena pulled over about 45 meters past where the girl was standing and sat in her idling truck for several minutes, debating what to do. The outside temperature was minus 25 degrees Celsius with a wind chill that made it feel like minus 40 degrees Celsius. No one could survive long in such conditions without proper shelter. Lena finally made a decision that might have saved both their lives. She decided to at least offer the girl a ride to the next town, which was about 65 kilometers ahead. Lena reversed her truck back to where the girl was standing. She lowered the passenger window and called out, "Hey, do you need help? It's dangerous to be out in this weather." The girl looked up at Lena with an expression that seemed to be genuine relief and gratitude. She was young, blonde, and beautiful, but her lips were already blue from the cold, and she was shivering uncontrollably. "My car broke down about a kilometer back," the girl shouted against the wind. "I've been walking for almost an hour trying to find help. Can you give me a ride to the next town? I can pay you." Lena hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the passenger door. The girl climbed into the cab, bringing with her a blast of piercing cold air and a smell Lena couldn't quite identify, something sweet and sickening, like flowers that had been left in water for too long. The girl introduced herself as Anastasia and explained that her car had skidded off the road into a ditch. She said she had tried to call for help, but her phone had died and the storm was worsening by the minute. Lena felt sorry for her and was glad she decided to help. Anastasia seemed polite and grateful, and she promised she would only need a ride to the next truck stop where she could call someone to pick her up. As they drove through the storm, Lena tried to strike up a conversation to pass the time. But Anastasia's answers were strange and disjointed. When Lena asked where she was from, Anastasia said, "From around here." But when pressed for specific details, she couldn't name a town or local landmark. When Lena asked about her family, Anastasia said she was visiting relatives, but she couldn't remember their names or exactly where they lived. What truly began to worry Lena was Anastasia's behavior. Despite having been standing in sub-zero temperatures for over an hour, Anastasia was not warming up. Even with the truck's heater on full blast, Anastasia continued to shiver and her lips remained blue. When Lena offered her a blanket from her bunk, Anastasia's skin felt ice cold to the touch, as if the cold had penetrated so deeply that even artificial heat couldn't warm her. About 30 kilometers down the road, Lena noticed something that made her stomach churn. In her rearview mirror, she could see another pair of headlights following them, maintaining a consistent distance despite the poor visibility and treacherous road conditions. When Lena slowed down, the trailing vehicle also slowed. When she sped up slightly, the vehicle matched her speed. Lena had learned to trust her instincts during her many years on the road, and something about this situation felt like a trap. Lena decided to test her suspicions. She told Anastasia that she needed to stop at an upcoming rest area in a few kilometers to check her cargo's security. Anastasia's reaction was immediate and alarming. She became agitated and insisted they must keep driving, that stopping would be dangerous in the storm. When Lena explained it would only take a few minutes, Anastasia grabbed Lena's arm with surprising strength and said, "No, we can't stop. They're waiting for us to stop." Lena asked who they were, but Anastasia just stared out the passenger window and mumbled something about needing to keep moving. That's when Lena realized Anastasia wasn't breathing normally. Her chest wasn't rising and falling as it should, and when Lena looked closer, she realized Anastasia wasn't breathing at all. There was no visible breath in the cold air, no condensation on the window, nothing. The realization hit Lena like a physical blow. Anastasia was not alive. Whatever was sitting in her passenger seat was something else entirely, something that was using Anastasia's appearance to gain Lena's trust and cooperation. Lena struggled to keep her expression neutral while her mind raced to consider her options. She was alone on a deserted highway in the middle of a blizzard, with something inhuman sitting a meter away from her. Lena decided to play along while she formulated an escape plan. She continued driving towards the truck stop she had mentioned, but as they got closer, Anastasia became increasingly agitated. She kept looking in the rearview mirror and mumbling about them catching up. Finally, Anastasia turned to Lena with an expression that was no longer human. Her eyes had become completely black, and when she smiled, Lena could see that her teeth were sharp and pointed. "You know what I am, don't you?" Anastasia said in a voice that was no longer entirely human. "I can smell your fear. It's delicious." Lena's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to keep driving steadily towards the truck stop. Anastasia continued to speak, and what she said next explained everything. "We've been hunting on this highway for 3 winters now. I stand in the cold to attract the sympathetic ones, the drivers who can't resist helping someone in distress. Then my friends follow us until we reach a secluded spot where they can take the truck and its cargo. Usually, we let the drivers go afterward, but lately, we've been getting hungrier." Lena realized that the headlights following them belonged to Anastasia's accomplices and that she was being led into a trap. But she also realized that Anastasia had made a fatal mistake. She had revealed that there was an afterword for some drivers, which meant not all their victims were immediately killed. Lena decided to make her move at the truck stop where there might be other people and security cameras. As they approached the truck stop, Lena could see that it was brightly lit and appeared open, with several other trucks parked there. Anastasia became increasingly frantic, insisting that they should drive past it and continue to a more private location. Lena ignored her protests and pulled her truck into the truck stop's parking lot, driving directly towards the main building where the lights were brightest. Anastasia made her final threat. "If you don't leave here right now, I will kill you where you sit." But Lena had noticed something crucial. Anastasia hadn't touched the door handle since getting into the truck, and she seemed unable to operate any of the truck's controls. Whatever Anastasia was, she appeared to be bound by some rule that prevented her from harming Lena while they were inside the truck or on public property. Lena pulled her truck right in front of the main entrance of the truck stop and immediately started honking her horn repeatedly. Within seconds, other truck drivers and truck stop employees came out to see what the emergency was. Lena pointed at Anastasia and screamed, "This isn't human. She's trying to trap me." Anastasia let out a shriek that shattered both side windows of the truck, then simply vanished, not opening the door and running, but truly disappearing like smoke. The temperature in the cab immediately returned to normal, and the sickeningly sweet smell that had bothered Lena instantly dissipated. The other truck drivers helped Lena contact the police, and when officers arrived, they found something disturbing in the truck stop's security camera footage. The camera clearly showed Lena's truck stopping and Lena getting out, but it did not show a passenger in the truck at any point. According to the video evidence, Lena was alone in her truck the entire time. This phenomenon, where a person is seen by a witness but not by cameras, adds a layer of uncanny mystery to the event. What was even more disturbing was what the police found when they investigated Lena's route. There was indeed a car in a ditch about 1 kilometer from where Lena picked up Anastasia, but that car had been there for over 6 months. The car was registered to Anastasia Volkov, a 22-year-old student who had disappeared during a snowstorm the previous winter. Her body was found inside the car frozen, still wearing the same jeans and thin jacket as the hitchhiker. This reveals a tragic and chilling connection between the supernatural entity and a real-life victim, suggesting the entity uses the form of the deceased. Police confirmed that Lena was the 4th truck driver in 2 years to report picking up a hitchhiker matching Anastasia's description on the same stretch of highway during winter storms. In every case, the drivers reported being followed by a mysterious vehicle and feeling like they were being led into a trap. The 3 previous drivers had all managed to escape by stopping in a public location, but 2 other truck drivers had disappeared completely on that highway during the same period. Their trucks were found abandoned with no trace of the drivers. This points to a recurring, organized threat. Lena learned that the E6 highway in northern Norway has one of the highest rates of missing truck drivers in the country, with over a dozen drivers disappearing without explanation in the last 5 years. Local law enforcement believes there is an organized group using a supernatural lure to entice truck drivers into remote areas, but they have never been able to apprehend the culprits or determine exactly how they operate. The E6 is a significant route, especially for freight, connecting various parts of Norway and even extending into Sweden. Such disappearances highlight the dangers faced by truck drivers, particularly in harsh environments like the Norwegian winter, where even routine checks like ensuring snow chains are used are critical for safety. Lena still drives that route occasionally, but never during a winter storm, and she has installed additional security cameras in her truck that record both the interior and exterior. She has also joined a network of truck drivers who share real-time information about suspicious activity on dangerous routes. Most importantly, she never again considered breaking her rule about picking up hitchhikers, no matter how desperate their situation appeared. Her experience underscores the importance of vigilance and community among drivers in hazardous conditions. The final, gruesome detail of Lena's story is what she discovered when she researched Anastasia Volkov's disappearance. According to police reports, Anastasia was driving to visit relatives when her car skidded off the road during a snowstorm. But here's what keeps Lena awake at night. Anastasia Volkov had been driving north when she had her accident, but the hitchhiker, claiming to be Anastasia, had been standing on the south side of the highway as if she were trying to retrace her route in the opposite direction, luring drivers back to the location where she died. This suggests a malevolent entity tied to the victim's death site, actively seeking new targets by mimicking the deceased, adding a terrifying supernatural twist to the already dangerous reality of winter driving in Norway. This story takes us to the most disturbing tale, and it involves a discovery that connects all previous stories in a way that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the European highway system. This story comes from veteran driver Ilara Dubois, who has been driving long haul for 22 years and has unwittingly encountered elements from every story we've shared tonight. Ilara's experience will reveal the terrifying truth that binds all the supernatural and inexplicable phenomena faced by truck drivers on Europe's darkest roads. Ilara received a call in April 2023 from a dispatcher she had never worked with before, offering her the highest paying contract of her career. The job involved transporting what was described as archived classified scientific data from a storage facility in the Occitanie region of southern France to a destination that would be provided to her en route. The pay was enormous, nearly 50,000 euros for a single delivery, but the contract included an unusual clause requiring absolute confidentiality and prohibiting her from discussing the cargo or the destination with anyone. The pickup location was a massive warehouse complex in rural southern France surrounded by military-style security and accessible only via multiple checkpoints. Ilara was required to undergo extensive background verification and sign documents she was not permitted to read before being escorted to the loading dock. The cargo consisted of hundreds of encrypted data drives, high-performance computing clusters, and what appeared to be specialized atmospheric sensors. As the cargo was being loaded, Ilara overheard a conversation between facility staff that chilled her blood. They were discussing Project Night Road, an ongoing operation that had been collecting data on supernatural encounters, inexplicable phenomena, and what they called dimensional intrusions along the European highway system for over 35 years. According to what Ilara overheard, every strange encounter reported by truck drivers was not only real, but was part of a coordinated experiment conducted by an organization with unlimited resources and technology far beyond public knowledge. The loading supervisor, seemingly unaware that Ilara could hear him, explained to a colleague that the archived material contained documentation of thousands of truck drivers' encounters with ghosts, time loops, phantom truck stops, and other supernatural phenomena. But these were not random occurrences. They were carefully orchestrated tests designed to study how ordinary people respond to impossible situations. The organization had been using the trucking industry as a testing ground for experimental technology that could manipulate reality, time, memory, and human consciousness. Ilara realized that she was not just transporting research files. She was carrying evidence of the largest psychological and supernatural experiment in human history. Every ghost encounter story, every report of a phantom location, every tale of a vanished driver had been part of this project. The organization had been systematically terrorizing truck drivers for decades while collecting data on human responses to supernatural trauma. As Ilara began her journey, she received her destination coordinates via an advanced encrypted navigation system that had been installed in her truck during loading. Her destination was a facility in the Austrian Alps that she had to reach within 72 hours. But as Ilara drove into the night, she began to experience elements of every supernatural encounter she had ever heard from fellow truck drivers. First, Ilara encountered the phantom convoy from our opening story. 3 trucks appeared in her mirror and began following her across France, maintaining perfect formation and responding to her speed changes with uncanny precision. When Ilara tried to contact them on her CB radio, she heard the voices of drivers who had died decades ago. All of them pleaded with her to turn back and abandon her delivery. As Ilara entered Switzerland, she faced the wrong exit scenario. Her navigation system began directing her onto roads that existed on no map, leading her through landscapes that seemed to shift and change as she drove. She passed through abandoned towns filled with people in night clothes who watched her truck with hungry eyes, and she heard voices on her radio describing road conditions from decades past. The psychological pressure mounted as Ilara drove through Austria. She picked up a hitchhiker who appeared to be a young woman in distress but who revealed herself to be something inhuman with black eyes and pointed teeth. The hitchhiker told Ilara that she was nearing the source of all the supernatural activity plaguing Europe's highways. A facility where reality itself was being manipulated and tested. Her truck began to experience a sealed container phenomenon as the cargo in the back started moving and making noises. When she investigated, she discovered that the archived files were somehow alive, not only containing documentation of supernatural encounters, but actually trapped supernatural entities. The organization had been trapping ghosts, demons, and other paranormal beings for use in their experiments on human subjects. As Ilara neared the Austrian facility, she encountered a 24-hour truck stop that existed only in the supernatural realm. The phantom truck stop appeared exactly as other drivers had described it, complete with friendly staff who tried to persuade her to stay, and a mysterious device that was to be installed in her truck. Alara realized that this location served as a processing center where the organization prepared drivers for supernatural encounters and monitored their responses. The truck stop staff revealed to Alara that she had been chosen not only to deliver the archived material, but to be the final test subject in Project Night Road. Her 22 years of driving experience and her reputation for reliability had made her the perfect candidate for the ultimate experiment. A test that would determine whether the organization's reality manipulation technology was ready for global deployment. Alara discovered that every supernatural encounter she had ever heard of was connected to this facility: the antique delivery that trapped drivers in haunted objects, the voices on Channel 19 giving warnings from beyond the grave, the non-human hitchhikers, the never-ending mile that trapped drivers in time loops, the memory facility that stole drivers' experiences, and the replacement program that created perfect duplicates. All of these were different facets of the same grand experiment. The organization behind Project Night Road was not just studying supernatural phenomena, they were creating them using technology that combined advanced science with captured supernatural entities. They had been testing the limits of human consciousness and reality manipulation. Their ultimate goal was to develop the ability to control human perception and memory on a massive scale, potentially influencing entire populations. Alara learned that the facility she was approaching served as the command center for all supernatural activity on Europe's highways. Every phantom truck, every ghost location, every impossible encounter was orchestrated from this location, using a combination of advanced technology and trapped supernatural entities. The organization had essentially weaponized the paranormal, turning it into a tool for studying and controlling human behavior. As Alara reached the final approach to the facility, she made a decision that would save not only her own life, but potentially countless other drivers' lives. Instead of delivering the archived material to the facility, Alara drove her truck directly into the main building of the facility, causing a massive explosion that destroyed decades of research data and released hundreds of trapped supernatural entities. The destruction of the facility created a supernatural shock wave that was felt across the entire highway system. Phantom truck stops vanished, time loops collapsed, and trapped spirits were finally freed to move on to whatever comes after death. The sudden cessation of supernatural activity on Europe's highways was noticed by truck drivers across the continent, who reported that the roads suddenly felt normal for the first time in decades. Alara survived the explosion but was severely injured and spent months recovering in a secure medical facility. During her recovery, she was interviewed by federal agents who revealed that Project Night Road had been under investigation for years, but the organization's use of supernatural entities and reality manipulation technology had made conventional investigation impossible. Alara's destruction of the facility had provided the breakthrough law enforcement needed to expose the operation. The ensuing investigation revealed the true scope of Project Night Road. The organization had been operating with funding from various governments and had facilities on every continent. Their experiments had affected not only truck drivers, but also pilots, ship captains, railway engineers, and other transportation professionals worldwide. The goal was to develop the ability to control human consciousness and memory as a tool for social and political manipulation. Alara's heroic actions had disrupted the organization's operations, but investigators warned that other facilities remained active and that the technology developed through Project Night Road could still be utilized by other groups. The supernatural threat to truck drivers may have subsided, but the organized human threat remains real. If you watched until the end, you are among those who know this terrifying truth. Subscribe to the Scare Zone channel immediately for more real and verified horror stories that could save lives. Share this video with truck drivers, leave a comment if you've experienced similar events, and like the video to help the algorithm. Trust your instincts when driving at night. Vigilance is key to safety. Be aware on the highway.